Hi, I'm Kat, and today I have for you a true crime case, a word in Romanian, and I will also be doing my makeup at the same time. And for everybody, welcome to the Halloween month. And a disclaimer, if you're wondering about my headband, so you can see how dedicated I am, I actually did it myself. So this is unique in the world, you won't be able to find any other like this. I don't know how much it's going to hold, but yeah, I did something, right? After receiving so much bad news lately, like a week ago or so, I don't even want to think about it. Okay, anyway, so the word for today is ADN. ADN. A-D-N. ADN. Well done, guys, you just said DNA. In the afternoon of October 31st, 2018, 74-year-old John, a resident in Hayward, California, got a ride from his wife to a medical building in Union City. Although it might sound like any other ordinary day, in fact, two Santa Clara County investigators were in charge of watching John as he went to the pharmacy, bought a cup of coffee from a kiosk, drank it, and then threw the empty cup in the bin. On that Halloween day, the investigators waited until John was gone before taking his coffee cup from the bin to send it to the Santa Clara County Crime Lab for DNA analysis. And then they waited. Now, you might ask yourself, why would investigators need a DNA sample from a 74-year-old man, and more so taking it from a coffee cup? John had no idea that his DNA on that cup would be a key piece of evidence linking him to 4 decades-old cold cases, the Stanford Murders, which terrified the campus community between February 1973 and October 1974. With all of the repeated efforts by law enforcement at the time, it wasn't until modern advances in DNA techniques would finally break open 3 cases and create new hope for solving a 4th case. John Arthur Jatrow was born on August 26, 1944 in Newark, Ohio. He is one of 4 children born to Army serviceman Charles J. Jatrow. Because of his position in the military, the family traveled often between various bases, both in the USA and abroad, having lived in Japan, Hawaii, and North Carolina. In 1960, Charles, the father, was transferred to West Germany for his military service, moving to the town of Bad Kreuznach with his family. John would spend his teenage years there, attending the Bad Kreuznach American High School, where the children of other American servicemen also attended. When John was 18 years old, in 1963, he actually ended up going to prison in Germany. On the evening of 8th of June 1963, John attended a school dance shortly before he was to graduate from high school. At the dance, he met 15-year-old Margaret Williams, the daughter of an army chaplain. Later that night, John offered to walk Margaret home, but instead he took her to the campus's baseball field, where he assaulted R.A.P.E.D. and beat her. Margaret suffered a severe head injury and later sadly died from complications. John had been seen with Margaret that night by several witnesses, so he became the main suspect and he was arrested. When questioned, he eventually admitted to having sex with Margaret, but he denied killing her. In July 1964, according to the German law at the time, John was tried as a juvenile and he was found guilty on all counts. He was given the maximum sentence allowed for someone under 21 years old, which was 10 years in prison. At his sentencing, John expressed remorse and he even apologized to Margaret's family. German officials believed that John was likely to lead a righteous life after he was sent to live with his parents in the US, where he returned in 1969 under probation supervision. John, in his statement to German investigators, said that he and Margaret met at a dance for the first time. He didn't see her before then, but noticed her when she got out of a car. They then went for a walk and had a chat. John also said that he had no special intention. Margaret told him that she had to be home at a specific time, but instead of walking towards the school and her home, they both went in the opposite direction. They sat on a bench in a park and they later walked to a playground. John wanted to be alone with Margaret, so they walked away from any people nearby. John said that he didn't intend to have any intercourse with Margaret. He was just, looking for a good place where he took other girls before kissing or smooching, as he said. John and Margaret began kissing while sitting on his jacket, and they were soon lying down. He started touching Margaret, hinting that he wanted to have intercourse. He told her that he had had a lot to drink, but Margaret was nervous and just wanted to go home. It started raining, so she said that's why she wants to go home. She didn't really accept John's hints, and according to John, as his excitement increased, he wanted to rape her. My guess is that Margaret started feeling uncomfortable because she started talking very loudly, trying to get someone's attention. But John gave her a judo chop in the neck so that she couldn't talk anymore. A judo chop actually is a judo move where you hit someone around this area of the neck and you kind of cut their speech off. Something like that. Margaret then started crying, and then John hit her in the face because he thought that when she would regain her voice, she would only cry even louder. He said that the only reason he struck her was to prevent her from talking or shouting. As Margaret was standing up to leave, she fell to the ground after John struck her. He covered her face with his jacket and held it over his mouth with both hands. With one hand, he then grabbed her by the throat. She lost consciousness, but John had the impression that, she was still breathing, so he forced himself on her. He kept his hand over her mouth to keep her from crying out if she regained consciousness. He then grabbed his jacket and ran away. After going back home, he took his dog for a walk and he went back to the area to see if Margaret was still alive. But sadly, Margaret Williams never regained consciousness and she died on the playing field. After serving 6 years for this crime, John was released and he then returned to the United States, settling in Reno, Nevada. He married a woman called Susan, and shortly after the wedding, the couple moved to Palo Alto, California, where they lived from 1971 to 1975. Susan already had a daughter from a previous relationship when they met. During this time, with no education, John had to make a living as a low-skilled laborer, and he worked various jobs ranging from a security guard, a carpenter, and lab technician at Mills Hospital. In the mid-1970s, he joined the Boy Scouts of America, and he got a job as a counselor organizing camps and camping trips in his spare time. The Mills Hospital that he worked at was close to the prestigious Stanford University campus. John actually had a good reputation and he volunteered with the Boy Scouts in his spare time. But his urges would eventually resurface. In 1975, John was charged with sexually assaulting a 17-year-old female Scout member. He was convicted, but after reaching a mutual agreement between him and the victim, some of the charges were dropped. So he got off with a fine and he spent less than 1 month in jail. Soon after this, his marriage to Susan ended, which was a great relief for his stepdaughter, who later claimed that John had been sexually assaulting her from a young age. John wouldn't stay single for very long because in 1978 he went on to marry his second wife, Linda. So the couple returned to Newark, had 2 children, and John became involved in business activities. He showed no signs of mental illness or any other suspicious behavior, and he was well regarded by those around him. In the late 1980s, John left Ohio and moved back to California, this time settling in Alameda County. In 2003, his second wife Linda sadly died from cancer. John got married for a third time in 2008. He joined the Fremont Elks Lodge, a religious fraternal order which advocated for Christian values and patriotism, where John had the position of exalted ruler. In this position, he was responsible for supervising the duties of the members. To the community, John seemed like a model citizen. He was a charming family man, he was part of a local Christian fraternal order, he would buy Christmas gifts for the neighborhood children, and he would even use his carpentry skills to help people. At the same time, the police were investigating an unsolved murder case. Leslie Marie Perlov was a 21-year-old Stanford graduate who worked part-time in the campus law library. On February 13, 1973, Leslie went missing in Palo Alto. She was last seen at her place of employment. Witnesses reported seeing Leslie sitting in her car at around 6 p.m. speaking to a man with long blonde hair through the roll-down window. The same day, her orange 1972 Chevrolet Nova was found abandoned near the intersection of Old Page Mill Road and Page Mill Road. The keys were missing. Leslie lived with her widowed mother, Florence Perlov, in Los Altos Hills and had 2 younger siblings, 20-year-old Diane and 18-year-old Craig. Highly intelligent and ambitious, she planned to become a lawyer. She was offered a place at the University of Pennsylvania and was due to start her degree in the fall of 1973. Leslie's abandoned car was found first, then 3 days later her body was discovered on the local hiking trail. She was found northwest of her car under an oak tree with a floral scarf knotted tightly around her neck, which suggested that she was strangled. The coroner estimated that Leslie died on the evening of February 13. It seemed that her attacker tried to sexually assault her. Her skirt was pulled up around her waist. There was also evidence that she fought back really hard, but sadly to no avail. Her pantyhose was removed and stuffed in her mouth. Leslie's purse, which wasn't in her car, was never found. It seemed that Leslie was in the woods on that day taking nature photos to commission a painting for her mother's birthday. At first, 15 detectives were working on the investigation into Leslie's murder full-time, but after a few months, which then turned into years of no progress, the number of detectives went down to only 2 detectives working on the case part-time. Until 2018, Leslie's case went cold. With the advances in DNA testing and genealogy databases, there was finally a match found. Now, remember John, his DNA was found under Leslie's fingernails. But because his DNA wasn't in any US criminal databases, that's why investigators collected the discarded coffee cup to confirm the match. So, with this information, in November 2018, John was arrested at his home. Having his DNA already, investigators were able to link him to yet another murder. 21-year-old Janet Ann Taylor was last seen hitchhiking at around 7:05 p.m. on March 24, 1974. After visiting friends on the Stanford University campus, she was trying to get a ride home to La Honda, a 35-minute drive, as her car was in the repair shop. The area where Janet was hitchhiking was less than a mile from where Leslie's body was found just over a year earlier. Janet wasn't a Stanford graduate, but her father, Chuck Taylor, was the university's athletic director and a famous retired football player. Janet recently graduated from Canada College, a community college in Redwood City, 15 minutes from Stanford. She started working at a maritime information firm as a teletypist in Palo Alto. On March 25, 1974, the day after she was seen hitchhiking, her body was found in a ditch 3 miles from Stanford University on Sand Hill Road and Manzanita Way by a milk truck driver. Just like Leslie, Janet was strangled. She wasn't sexually assaulted, and she was clothed except for her raincoat, shoes and belt, which were later discovered by detectives discarded on Sand Hill Road. She had also been carrying a purse, which was never found. Detectives just didn't know where to begin in this investigation. They believed there was a sexual motive to the murder, even though Janet was not sexually assaulted. Whoever picked her up when she was hitchhiking killed her, then threw her belongings on Sand Hill Road as they drove away. Detectives had very few leads, and just as Leslie's case, Janet's case also went cold. The public were convinced that Leslie and Janet were killed by the same person, even though detectives said there was no solid evidence to back this up. Everything they had was circumstantial. DNA, which was collected from Janet's torn green pants, matched John's DNA. Now, I'm not sure if pants as in underwear or pants as in another piece of clothing, as you say trousers in the UK, because for example here when you say pants, here in the UK when you say pants you refer to underwear, whereas when you say any other kind of lower garments you refer to as trousers. And I've read some other articles which suggested that it was found on her jeans, so I'm not sure was it the pants as in the underwear or the jeans. Even though it wasn't clear if Janet was raped, her torn clothing suggested that this was the motive. The murder of Leslie and Janet became known as the Stanford Murders, and John was now considered a serial killer with 3 victims. Although he was suspected in other crimes as well, there were no further charges filed. In 2021, after a 3-week trial for Janet's murder, John Jatrow was found guilty and he was sentenced to 7 years to life without parole, which were the sentence guidelines in 1974. John's first wife, Susan Camarota, testified that he told her before getting married that he killed a girl in Germany. She also said that he was convicted of rape after initially being charged with raping a teenage girl who was a member of his Explorer Scout troop in 1975. According to her, he served his jail sentence on weekends. John also regularly traveled along the route where Janet was found, according to testimony from his stepdaughter. Kathy Stone, Susan's daughter, testified that she first met John when she was 6 years old. The family lived in various locations along the Mid-Peninsula. They lived for around 2 years on Montrose Avenue in Palo Alto, then moved to Redwood City for another 2 years before moving back to an apartment in Palo Alto. They also lived in Woodside. While living at an aunt's house on Roberta Drive in Woodside, John would drive Kathy to school every day. To get to Roberta Drive where they lived, they would have to travel on Mountain Home Road, which connects with Sand Hill Road west of Searsville Lake. Leslie Taylor's body was found on Sand Hill Road near Manzanita Way, the route that John would have taken daily to go home. The distance is around 2 miles and the drive would only take about 6 minutes.
His sister called me and she says, "Susan, I have something to tell you. John's been arrested for murder." And I'm going, "What?" I found out when, and I'm going, "Oh my God, he did it when he was married to me." But, oh my God, and I had no clue, no idea, no anything. because he never showed that side of him. He never showed that he was even capable of doing that. You never imagined him being that way.
My mom called me, said she had some news and asked me if I was sitting down. And wow, that was, I didn't know exactly how to react. I was kind of happy in a way, sad for the people that he had hurt, but really happy that he finally got caught.
John's second trial was delayed because of his illness. He was already in a wheelchair by this point. In January 2023, just this year, John pleaded guilty to Leslie's murder, admitting that he killed her after trying to rape her when she fiercely fought back. Leslie's DNA under her nails finally brought John to justice after 50 years of being free. At 78 years old and in poor health, John was again sentenced to 7 years to life in prison. But John is suspected in many more murders. During the 1970s, the Bay Area was known as a stomping ground for murderers like the high-profile serial killers Ed Kemper, who murdered 10 people stalking young female hitchhikers in the vicinity of Santa Cruz, and the unidentified Zodiac killer who killed at least 5 people in secluded areas near San Francisco. The Stanford Murders, happening every few months without a single arrest, brought the fear home to campus. Ted Bundy was even briefly considered a suspect in one of the murder cases. The murders in today's case began in February 1973 with the death of Leslie Perloff, who was found in the foothills above campus. Only 7 months later, the body of David Levine, a 20-year-old physics student who was working late at night in a lab, was found on campus in front of Meyer Library. He was stabbed several times in the back with a knife. The third murder victim, Janet Taylor, was the daughter of the former Stanford athletic director Chuck Taylor. Just like Leslie, she seemed to have been sexually assaulted and killed by strangulation. With no suspects arrested in any of the previous 3 murders, another murder happened. On the night of October 12, 1974, Arliss Perry, a 19-year-old newlywed, got into an argument with her husband, who was a Stanford pre-med student. At around 11 p.m., she walked to Memorial Church to pray. Her husband, worried when she didn't get back to their Escondido Village apartment, reported her missing at around 3 in the morning. At 5:45 a.m., Stanford security guard Stephen Crawford called police to report that he found a dead body lying between pews when he unlocked the church doors that morning. It was Arliss Perry. She was sexually assaulted with candles and stabbed in the back of the head, according to a Stanford Daily report at the time. At first, investigators were thinking that maybe Arliss was murdered by a random intruder who just wandered into the church. But they changed their mind and thought this attacker was someone who knew the church well, the layout, the opening and closing times, and so on. The FBI actually got involved with this investigation. They came up with a profile of the killer in which they hypothesized that he was between the ages of 17 and 22 years old, a quiet loner who kept meticulous notes about the church and the churchgoers. They suspected he took belongings from his victims as trophies, which would explain the absence of Arliss's glasses from the crime scene. Remember Stephen, the security guard who called police after finding Arliss's body? He became a person of interest, but there was never enough evidence to charge him with her murder. And that's how he actually stayed for 4 decades. In 1979, David Berkowitz, the serial killer son of Sam, actually inserted himself into the Arliss Perry investigation. This was 5 years after her murder. David Berkowitz wrote letters in which he suggested that he knew who killed Arliss. Investigators went to interview him at the Attica Correctional Facility in Attica, New York, where he was in prison at the time. But here is the thing. David Berkowitz was known for being an attention seeker, initially telling the FBI that a demon disguised as his neighbor's dog told him to kill. He eventually retracted this, telling them he just made it all up. Okay, I'm gonna be back shortly, guys. He told the court-appointed psychiatrist David Abrahamson that his motivation for murder was revenge on a world that he felt had rejected and hurt him. When David heard about the murder of Arliss and the rumors that it may have been a ritual killing carried out by a satanic cult, he wanted to get involved. He enjoys feeling superior to authority figures and he loves pretending to have valuable information, and Arliss was sadly the case for him to do it. Sergeant Ken Kahn, who was one of the first investigators to arrive at the crime scene in the church, went to New York to interview David Berkowitz. He soon realized that his claims were fake, and after half an hour he ended the interview. Kahn said, quote, "He claims he was in Queens in a cult meeting and that a guy stood up and said he killed Arliss Perry. Then he said he couldn't tell us who because someone would kill his father in Florida. We knew we were spinning our wheels," end of quote. Kahn also said that a lot of the leads in Arliss's case did nothing more than send them on a wild goose chase, just like David Berkowitz. Fast forward now to 2016, cold case investigators for the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office brought in an old suspect in the Arliss Perry case for questioning, but this time with new evidence. The investigators went through boxes of stored evidence in the Stanford Murders, re-examining all newspaper articles, recordings of interviews, photographs, and all clothing. The lead detective in the Arliss Perry case, Lieutenant Rick Alanis, made a shocking discovery. The pants labeled as Arliss's were too large to fit her. They actually belonged to her husband. When Arliss's own pants were sent in for analysis in 2016, DNA from semen found on them matched with that of Stephen Crawford, the former Stanford security guard. After more investigative work, detectives went to Stephen's San Jose studio apartment in 2018 with a search warrant. And bear in mind that this was 44 years later. By this point, Stephen Crawford was 72 years old. Stephen knew that he was a person of interest even after more than 4 decades. On June 28, 2018, at 9:04 a.m., detectives from the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Department arrived at the Del Coronado apartment at 5273 Camden Avenue, where he lived. The door was unlocked, so after announcing themselves, they entered the apartment. Stephen was sitting on the bed in the studio holding a gun. The detectives retreated back out the door, and seconds later they heard a single gunshot. When they went back in, they saw Stephen still on the bed, having shot himself in the head. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Later that day, Sheriff Laurie Smith held a press conference to announce that after 44 years, she and her colleagues believed they finally knew for sure who killed Arliss Perry, and her family could have closure at last. Retired detective Randy Bynum saw Stephen Crawford's suicide as affirmation of his belief that he was guilty of Arliss's murder. Quote, "I guess he didn't want to face society. Even though he wasn't brought to justice, justice was served," end of quote. Stephen Crawford had been a U.S. Air Force veteran. In 1971, he started working for the Stanford Department of Public Safety as a police officer. In 1972, however, a new police chief took over. One of the first things that the new chief did was look into which officers were qualified to carry guns. So to find out, officers were told that they needed to reapply for their positions. Stephen's favorite part of the job was to carry a gun. 3/4 of the officers were unqualified and they were given positions as security guards, including Stephen Crawford. He constantly complained over the years about how unfair he was, and in 1976 he left Stanford, but after getting his revenge. He stole a few priceless items from the university, including Native American artifacts such as art and sculptures, and close to 200 rare books. He was also believed to have stolen a cane which belonged to the late Leland Stanford, the founder of the university. Allegedly, he also printed himself a degree certificate from Stanford using a blank diploma. In 1992, he was arrested on suspicion of multiple thefts from the 1970s. He was given a 6-month suspended sentence. During an interview with police, he told them that he was upset with Stanford University and the investigators in the Arliss Perry murder case for being treated as a suspect in her murder. It's believed that Arliss wasn't actually Stephen's intended victim, but her murder was revenge against the university. Leticia Gonzalez, who managed the apartment building where Stephen lived, said that he was a loner who lived off his social security. He usually wore a cowboy hat and walked with a cane, and he mostly kept to himself. She's also seen in his apartment a few of the pieces that he stole from the university. So investigators considered the Arliss Perry case resolved, and they believed that maybe other Stanford murders would soon be resolved as well. Cortez, who was part of the team sent to arrest Stephen Crawford, was also assigned in 2016 to lead the reinvestigation into the Leslie Perloff case. Cortez says that Leslie fought for her life. He sent her fingernail clippings, preserved as evidence, to the county lab where criminologists found unidentifiable male DNA on them. But hope was not lost, because this time there was a newer method of DNA analysis to try. The forensic genetic genealogy has grown increasingly popular with law enforcement since 2018, when it was used to identify Joseph James DeAngelo Jr. as the Golden State Killer. It allows law enforcement to compare DNA samples collected from crime scenes with those submitted by the public to companies that offer genetic testing, such as Ancestry.com. And I'm sure that if you guys used Ancestry.com, you are not reading the small print, because as you can see, although all of these websites, they say that they keep your data private and secure, as you can tell, it's used by the police. So, you know, your data is not really private, is it? The genetic genealogy company from which Cortez requested the analysis sent back the name of a suspect, and it wasn't Stephen Crawford. However, it belonged to a different former employee of the university, John Jatrow, who worked as a lab tech at Stanford around the time of the murder, and John was living nearby in Hayward. So the final step was for investigators to confirm the DNA match by linking current DNA from John to the DNA profile found on the fingernail clippings. And this is the story about the discarded coffee cup. A week after sending the cup to the lab, John was a match. He was arrested 11 days later at his home. He also immediately became a suspect in the Janet Taylor case because of the similar circumstances surrounding the two murders. On the day that John was arrested, Cortez called Diane Perloff, Leslie's sister, telling her that they got him. So John was charged with Janet Taylor's murder that same year, based on evidence that showed that DNA obtained during his arrest matched DNA swabbed from the inside of Janet Taylor's pants. And so in 2021, John was convicted of her murder, and in 2023, this year, 50 years after the crime, he pleaded guilty to Leslie Perloff's murder. Diane, her sister, was in court for every hearing. At the sentencing, Diane spoke of the need for Leslie to be heard even in death. Leslie fought ferociously for her life. Leslie was stripped of her life and of her voice. But I am here, Diane said, adding that Leslie was too. feel our strength, and feel our fury. Diane addressed John directly, telling him the profound pain her sister's murder caused her and her family. Quote, I cannot walk alone in the woods. I will not walk to my car at night with a scarf around my neck. These things have become second nature to me, as they are with many women in this country. I am telling you all this because I want you to know that murder does not just affect the deceased. It changes many lives. It takes many lives and impacts a family forever. And while justice doesn't heal all wounds, it is the least we can do. End of quote. Diane expressed her anger that her older sister's life ended so violently and John had been free to live his life for 50 years. She later on said, quote, the scarf tied around her neck that day was mine. End of quote.
When the initial story came out, it said on there he was arrested for the killing of Margaret Williams, and then you call my aunt and uncle and ask them, and they told us that that story is true. You know, yes, this happened in Germany. We knew it happened, and it was a family secret.
Was that shocking?
Yes, very shocking, because that's not my dad. It was like your whole world stopped. That's how it felt. Your heart sunk. Like there's just no way this could be happening. And there possibly could be more out there. They don't just stop. You know, that's the scary part. How many are there? You know, you don't know. It's scary to think that there's more out there. Come out and tell me now how many more victims there are. Let's let the loved ones get their closure. And it's over. You're caught. You're never getting out of jail. You're going to die in jail. Let's get some closure to this.
The Santa Clara County investigators were relieved to finally give answers to the Perloff family, but there's always another cold case waiting to be solved. Santa Clara County has more than 100 cold cases, including the remaining Stanford murder, the murder of David Levine, the physics student described as brilliant by friends and family. His case is still being worked on. District Attorney Jeff Rosen said that nobody forgot about Leslie Perloff, including the Sheriff's Department and their investigators who worked the case tirelessly, the District Attorney's Office, their prosecutors, and the crime lab. While in court, Diane spoke of her mother Florence, who died in 2014, and never saw Leslie's killer brought to justice. She always stayed strong, not letting the pain break her, but instead used it to keep her daughter's memory alive. Sadly, both of Janet Taylor's parents died, so they were never able to see their daughter's killer brought to justice. San Mateo County Sheriff's Office released a statement from Janet's family. Quote, Janet lived life with enthusiasm and courage. Janet's future was bright. It would have been wonderful to see what she would have done. End of quote. Even though he was old when he went to prison, John still remained a danger to society, especially because he spent a lifetime as a sexual predator, not being caught until very recently. Moving forward, his DNA will be checked against other unsolved cases, but the full extent of his crimes sadly may never be known. He was free for 50 years to do what he did. On September 26, 2023, just a few days ago, aged 79, it was reported that John died behind bars 4 days earlier, but the cause of death has not yet been revealed. And with this, I'm going to end today's video, guys. Thank you so much for staying with me. Please do let me know what do you guys think in the comment section down below. For now, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!